This episode of The Clear Out was recorded on the 29th of May 2024 at home in Wicklow. And it is the fourth part of my series on masculinity. And this week I am trying to break down different expressions of or performances of masculinity and the way masculinity is ranked and how there are different levels, different tiers of being male, and how there are relegations and denigrations and less thans. And so I touch on areas of racism and homophobia, areas of ableism, I suppose, and other things. And I try, and I don't think I succeed, but at least I ask the question, who wants to be a man? So, yes, it's a bit of a rambler, but I think there are good things in the episode. I think if you're interested in this topic, you'll get something from it. Certainly you'll get some ideas to bounce off your own convictions. And I hope you'll find it interesting, diverting, provoking. And I will see you around the corner. Cheers.
Not gonna change my mind, leaving the dream behind, keep my emoji inside.
Hi, my name is Dara Clear and you're listening to The Clear Out. You're very welcome. How are you? How does this moment find you? Are you keeping well? Travelling well? Are you treading water? Are you powering through the ocean of life? I am feeling well myself, much better than I was last week. I'm still a little bit fatigued. Oh, poor me. Play a little violin. But otherwise, I feel the energy coming back, and with that renewed, restored energy comes motivation. It's really simple, isn't it? I feel good. I feel capable. I'm ready to do things. So I'm trying to catch up on productivity. And of course, the podcast is one of those things I need to produce. And so here I am, once again, battling my lonely battle, fighting my lonely fight, and trying to put something out there that is of use, something that is positive, something that you will walk away from or walk with and find yourself feeling better, feeling amused, diverted, entertained, provoked in a good way, not just provocation for the sake of it, but hopefully feeling thoughtful, hopefully feeling, that chimed. Do you like that one? I like that. Chime. That chimed with me. I was referring to something earlier and I used that expression. Who was I talking to? Maybe it was last night or yesterday. Anyway, chime. One of the things, I like the word, but I like what it evokes. The vibration. A vibration, a resonant vibration, a vibration of recognition. If something chimes with you, it's like it activates an internal response. A little bell goes off somewhere and activates a bell in you. I quite like that as an idea and as a feeling. So hopefully what I'm going to talk about today will chime with you on some level. I am continuing my series today on masculinity. So this is What is a Man Anyway? Part 4. And today I want to look at the sort of hierarchy of masculinity, or the hierarchy of masculinities, the hierarchy of men. And I want to ask the question, who wants to be a man? And what does that mean? So, of course, there's going to be overlap in some of the things that have been spoken about, talked about, reflected upon over the last 3 episodes. I'll try not to be too repetitive, But fundamentally, that is going to be the thrust of today's episode. It's a very male word, isn't it? Very phallic. Thrust. See, language is very gendered. You look at someone like Ernest Hemingway, for example. You look at someone like Philip Roth, for example. These are definitively male writers, very different stylists, but very male nonetheless. And a male writer is not necessarily a writer writing about male concerns, but it's a style of prose. It's a way of using language. It's a weaponizing of language that connotes masculine feelings and masculine energy. And so, for example, if you pitch somebody like Saul Bellow against Philip Roth, that's a very different kind of male voice. And I would instinctively or intuitively feel Saul Bellow is more feminine in his writing style than Philip Roth. You can argue with me about that if you wish, but there is something more open, more fluid, more self-mocking, something lighter, something more vulnerable in the style of writing and in the voice that he uses. I'm thinking of Herzog, the novel in particular, but why? Because that's the only Saul Bellow novel I've read. So I have no other reference point. But certainly in that, it's such a contrast to the Philip Roth voice, which is so sort of pugnacious and combative and brilliant. By the way, I've loved many Philip Roth books. But yes, in any case, the question is this idea of masculinity, of the embodiment of maleness, of what people think of when when I say the word man, what do we think of? And I don't know. I can't answer for you. You have to decide what that means to you. But there is, I think there's a tendency, and we all do this. There's a tendency to monolithize, men, and monolithize others. I mean, it's just a human shorthand of categorization to go, boom, that's what men are like. Boom, that's what women are like. That's what gay people are like. That's what black people are like. That's what Asians are like. And then it gets ever more reduced as the categories become smaller or more localized. Or so instead of Asian, that's what Chinese people are like. Instead of European, it's like, well, that's what Italians are like. That's what Spanish are like. That's what French are like. And it's, I mean, what is it? It's habitual. It's half informed by what we've received in terms of stereotypes, anecdotes, experiences, history, pop culture. We create convenient sketches, and they are invariably cliched and stereotypical. They are invariably enormously reductive and oversimplified. And yet most of them have some truth in them. But they're really just like a sticker on a box. And to really understand what's going on, you've got to go and get inside the box. I don't know if that's a great metaphor, but that's what I'm going with. You've got to get in and mix it up and work things out for yourself and make your own assessments and your own judgments. But I suppose what happens though as well is obviously the more we're exposed to, and just for the sake of the argument today, the more we're exposed to the other, whatever that is, and today we're going to focus on obviously men, and let's other men. I'm using other as a verb there, so to put men as other. The more we come in contact with the other, the more that informs our conclusions, the more it informs our sketches, the more it informs our assumptions and our generalizations. And I think what happens is a lot of behavior becomes habitual and a lot of thinking becomes habitual. And a lot of people will play up to what they've been given. A lot of people will fill the mold that they've been presented with. And this comes back to, cultural conditioning. This comes back to gender stereotyping, and its enforcement is probably too strong a word. Although, not necessarily. I guess it depends from, country to country, region to region, organization to organization, institution to institution. But there's sort of a folding in of conviction and action, a folding in of conviction and then a playing out, like a demonstration of this is what it is. So this is what it is in the case of our subject today. This is what it is to be male, and certain ideas are reinforced. Other ideas are resisted. Last week I spoke a lot about crying and the expression of emotionality, the expression of the internal lives of men, and how that is not something that is obviously encouraged across many societies. And maybe, and certainly, historically, it's our sense that is not something that has been encouraged in men. And again, not to retread ground from last week, but it seems to me that when there's a sense that many men feel like they're in crisis, that there's an even greater need for the expression of the internal experience, a greater need for the expression of the internal struggle or the internal sense of being. And if we go all the way back, if you were brave enough to go all the way back to the first episode of the podcast, I made a case there for the idea that we are only allowed to be what others allow us to be. Is that a tautology? Have I just tripped myself up there? We can only be what others allow us to be. We can only be what others give us permission to be. And I think the larger social impulse or the larger social learned behavior is for compliance and conformity. And that's what helps people believe they can survive as a community, as a society, as a country, if there's an unspoken agreement that we're all going to play by the same set of rules. Now, my argument in episode 1 was basically, I was trying to sort of, I think if I recall correctly, I was trying to look at how I behave at home, how I behave with my friends, how I behaved when I was teaching in the classroom, and how I behave when I go into a rehearsal space, or how I behave when I walk into a martial arts setting. When you enter those spaces, the people who know you, the people from those settings who know the coded behaviors and internal culture of those settings, they have a sort of a prescribed idea based on their own experience or based on how other people have behaved towards you. They have an idea of, this is how this person will behave. This is how I will interact with this person. And I think it's a very natural social instinct in the human animal, and arguably in all animals. There's a very, like an instantaneous, almost subconscious registering of friend or foe, of danger, threat, or no threat, and it's sort of like a microsecond of high alert, and then it's such and such that goes off. And it's not. I'm not talking about a startle response or being hyper vigilant. It happens, insanely quickly. It's instant. It's natural. It's eyes up, eyes down. Boom. I just registered who that was. No threat. Or I just registered the energy, the body language, the dress, the volume of voice, whatever it might be, and it's really just so natural to us to just quickly go click, click. I've just taken my mental snapshot, I've passed it through my database, and all the boxes came back ticked green. And now we proceed with whatever the reason is for us being there in the first place. And my argument was in the first episode that varies, that changes from location to location. It changes from setting to setting. And a key part of that is how we behave is based on how we are allowed to behave. How we interact is based on how we are allowed to interact. And there's a sort of a well-worn groove or track between you and the people in that place. And we fall into habitual behaviors. And then those habitual behaviors lead to certain assumptions and certain expectations. I would argue they also lead to enormous complacency. Enormous complacency and sort of switching off, and a sort of not reading signals very well, because we were just kind of this is this person, this is how they are. And, we only become hyper vigilant when we're, in a period of enormous interest in someone new, or when we are being hyper vigilant because we think there's a threat or danger, or perhaps we're in a state of dysregulation ourselves. Now, all of this, you're saying, okay, well, what's this got to do with men? Well, what are men allowed to be? What are our larger assumptions about men? And where are we getting those ideas? And do we question them? And I mean, what are the answers to those questions? I think that relationship, and I'm going to just make myself the observer here for the sake of this argument, but all we're doing is observing passively or actively and absorbing consciously or subconsciously the behaviors and patterns of all the men that we come in contact with. And we do the same for women, and we do the same for children, and we do the same for others. So other women and other men that aren't typical of what we are mostly exposed to or what we are mostly used to. And as our critical eye or our critical brain becomes more educated, more informed, more sophisticated, we start understanding that there are different categories and different divisions and different rankings and different social responses and different political responses and different cultural responses to different iterations of men, women, etc. So what I'm what I've been learning, and what I think I sort of instinctively understood or knew anyway from my own absorption of, of the messaging and signaling that I'm referring to. But what I'm learning is that when we talk about men, or when men are spoken of, often in this kind of very general sense, it's very typical that we are thinking of men as coming from a certain part of the world, of having a certain colour skin, of being of a certain sexual orientation, of being from a certain class position in society that has implications about education and economic status and job status, career status as well. And when I have looked into this very recently as part of this current course of study that I'm embarked upon, what I'm getting back is, fundamentally, I've hit the lottery in terms of being a white, straight, middle class, arguably, Western man. That I will fall into a very typical and I'm going to put representative in inverted commas here, representative category of men. So white, straight, male, European, middle class, third level education, where the model comes unstuck is when we talk about career or economic status, because I'm going to drop way down in that area for choices that I've made and I'm very aware of, and from having not pursued a conventional career, from coming from an artistic background, acting, performance, freelance, and so I would tick a lot of the boxes and then just not be present at all in probably the more reflective or representative box in that particular area. So in this kind of theoretical hierarchy of manhood, maleness, it just so happens that I'm ticking certain boxes. But of course, as soon as you scratch the surface a little bit, you go, well, hold on a second, this is absurd. You can't take that model of masculinity as the definitive representative iteration of masculinity. It doesn't work because it's not representative. It's indicative or even symptomatic of the colonial, imperial, the colonial imperial dominance of Western European culture over the last couple of 100 years. And I suppose we can think of the British Empire. We can think of the power distribution or shake-up of Europe after the World Wars. You can think of the rise of America, the USA, I should say more specifically, through the 20th century, and how really those different cultures and cultural influences, huge influence from the Anglo-Western world, but obviously influences from other parts of Western Europe as well. But this has led probably to the dominance of the idea of the white European male being the representative idea of masculinity. And then that you stop and go, well, hold on a second. Well, who's left behind? Who's left out of that model of masculinity? And you'll think, well, everybody else. Everybody else around the world. And you can talk about the developing world, what we used to refer to as the third world, whether that's, the nations of the African continent. Maybe you can think of, Middle East, Muslim countries, Arabic countries. You can think of Asia. You can think of India. You can think of South America. Australia is an outlier. Australia is, a very particular case study, and it has its own very particular and complex history. But Australia, of course, is institutionally a white European state over in the far end of Asia. And that's a very crude reduction of what Australia is, but it's an anomaly in that part of the world. And like New Zealand has its own very particular history and meld of European influence. But to my eye, the superficial read is it has a rich, thriving, vibrant indigenous culture that survived colonization. I know that's an oversimplification, but you compare the visibility of Maori culture, of indigenous New Zealand culture, to that of indigenous Australian culture, and the respective relationships to those cultures. It's quite different. And look, maybe that's not the worst place to start, because what you have, and if you go back to, just go and look up a cursory history of the colonization of Australia, and look at how the English institutionalized a type of white supremacy, a white ruling class, by declaring Australia unoccupied. I think the original Latin document, and the term was nullius. Was it nullius terra? I'm not going to remember. I haven't remembered that exactly right. But fundamentally, it was something written up officially to say there are no living people on this land of Australia, and further than that, Indigenous Australians were regarded as animals. So, let's just narrow the focus into the idea of manhood and masculinity. And these are the dynamics of male hierarchies and male rankings. So at the top we have white European occupying, or white European colonial presences, or imperial presences, and power holders. And there's a hierarchy within that, from officers or gentry, aristocracy, moving down through a ladder of power. So enforcers of the hierarchy, people who maintain the hierarchy, and servants, and all the way down. So there's a class component to masculinity as well. And again, I know a lot of these points of reference, you can go, well, that applies to women as well. I'm deliberately staying on men, and I'm not doing that to discount the female experience, but that's not what this series is about. So I'm trusting that you'll give me the benefit of the doubt, and allow for the fact that I'm not saying that only men are part of this, are subject to these power structures and subject to these hierarchies. Because there's a whole other discussion around, well, if men were ranked at a certain place on the hierarchy, were women even lower than that? And of course, I think there's a lot of evidence to back up that would be the case. But again, not the subject of this discussion. So again, if we think of the sort of the monolithic man idea, and men are this, but then you hold that up to examination and go, but hold on a second, not all men are created equal, so to speak. That is not something I believe, but that let's say that is a frame you can use and go, well, who doesn't enjoy that parity? Who doesn't enjoy that equality with the men who are at the top of the tree? And you can go, well, I just referred to New Zealand and Australia, and you go, well, indigenous peoples historically have found themselves under the butt of the gun, or under the heel of the boot, are being pummeled by the weaponry of cultural colonization, and pummeled obviously by actual weaponry. So you have then what is fundamentally the race issue, and the issue of like racialization. And I know there are many academics who have come to prominence arguing that, race is actually not a thing. Race is a construct. It's a social construct. It's related to power. It's related to subjugation. And it is something that was created by power holders, historically white people, Europeans. But it's a human construct and a social construct that has been weaponized to devastating effect historically. And so you can say, well, here's a white man and he's representative. So what's the experience of the man of color? What's the experience of a black man? What's the experience of, for want of a more politically correct phrase, what's the experience of a yellow man? What's the experience of a brown man? And again, I'm using very simplified terms, but you know what I mean. So if you think, for example, if I focus on the one aspect of this racial clash and this racial ranking, and if you think for a second of racism as it played out in the southern states of the USA, if you think of racism as it played out in South Africa, apartheid South Africa, and you think how black men were addressed as boy. I remember years ago, my father was, I'm sure it was my father, he spent some time, it's raining. He spent some time, it's raining. Lovely rain coming down, making everything greener than ever. My father he spent some time in the States, United States, in 1988. He went out for about 6 months for some work. And I don't know if it was in the context of him, preparing to make that journey, or he was sharing the observation with myself and, my brothers. But, he was pointing out to us, or telling us that it had been pointed out to him that he should be very careful about how he used the word boy when he went to America. And in Irish English, it's very common to address a bunch of lads as boys, a bunch of men. All right, boys, how's it going? Boys, oh boys. And it has no derogatory or certainly no racist connotations. And so I think that, the message from my dad was like, I've got to be careful, how I address people, and of course how I address, black people, African Americans when I'm out there, because it would be easy to give offense, because boy, of course, was used to denigrate and belittle and patronize and other black people. And I believe that was the case in South Africa as well. And of course, there were other epithets which were much more obviously pejorative. The N-word, of course, But this idea that you could address a grown man as boy was the ultimate insult. To go, we're not equal. I'm a man, you're a boy, you're a child, you're immature, you're undeveloped. And of course, the further implication of undeveloped was one of, evolutionary undevelopment, evolutionary retardation, evolutionary stasis, and evolutionary meant intellectually. It also meant, in terms of sensibility. So it was an absolute othering of, because of the colour of your skin, you are a lower class of being to me. So, that's just a really obvious and simple example of, okay, so a white man is representative of this, and as we think of men, but the black man's experience, the person of colour's experience is different because they're up against something else. They're not dealing, it's not a level playing field. They're not dealing with the same things. They're not dealing with the same assumptions and suppositions and expectations and signals that would indicate, okay, this is a man. No, hold on a second. This is not a man. This is a black man, therefore. And then a different set of assumptions and suppositions come in. And people will fall into received, conditioned ideas, prejudices, discriminatory beliefs, stereotypical beliefs. And so that person, the focus of these ideas, they have to overcome that before they can ascend to the level playing field. And so you start going through, well, okay, well, who else is a man but not a man? Who else is less than? And you can go, well, here's a man, but he's a gay man. You go, oh, okay. So there can be this conflation of homosexuality with femininity. And as I referred to last week, in some cultures, and I think this is broadly would be a received idea around the world, that masculinity is pitched in opposition to femininity. I referred last week to that article which was saying that that was true in North America, in the USA, in a survey or in research done there, but that was different in Denmark, where Denmark saw, the Danish research showed that men put masculinity as oppositional to, put manhood and masculinity as oppositional to boyhood, and which was a very different position and a very different frame of reference for understanding masculinity. The research argued that Danish men were quite comfortable with the idea of having feminine aspects as key parts of their, masculine identity, whether that was nurturing, caring, being vulnerable, displaying emotion, things that would be traditionally, historically, socially presented as female characteristics. So the conflation of homosexuality and femininity pitches homosexual men as oppositional to men and to the conventional received idea of masculinity. So again, it's another relegation. So you start going, okay, well, who gets masculine status bestowed on them without question, and who doesn't? And again, you tick a certain box when it's straight, male, white, Western European, tick, 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 tick. Black, no, hold on a second. Gay, no, hold on a second. Trans, oh Jesus, even worse. Disabled. So that's another register, a little bit different. But being able-bodied is definitely part of this picture of ticking the box of masculinity. And the idea of being physically functional, physically highly functional, sexually highly functional, is a key part of received masculine identity, received masculine tropes, stereotypes, the box ticking exercise. And if that is a male body, but it is wheelchair bound or in some way permanently incapacitated or disabled, that is going to be another relegation of masculinity. He's a man, but he's a man and he's also this, and therefore move down the ladder. So we have also then to throw into the mix, which I mentioned briefly before, the idea of class, and this idea of the relegation of class. And of course, relegation, that notion means that there is a tiered system that people will, you'll hear people argue or present the idea of classless society. Is that utopian? And what I'm seeing as I look at these different academic papers, the word utopian does come up frequently enough, and it's often in relation to the idea, the idea that there's a concept of masculinity that is utopian, that moves so far away from the idea of hegemonic or dominant patriarchal masculinity, or dominant masculinity that upholds patriarchal systems. And you see academics going, but maybe maybe these other conceptions of masculinity are utopian, which I think suggests not realistic. That's a separate idea. Now, as you know, if you've listened to me at all at any time, my general thrust as a person is to be quite idealistic. So I'm always in favour of the idea of we can do better, and we can create better circumstances and create better conditions and better interactions, and move towards greater tolerance, move towards greater understanding, move towards greater thoughtfulness, consideration, understanding. I said again, that shows you how important it is to me. Do you understand? So, maybe I have, an openness to the idea of a utopian society. I mean, I hear myself say that and I go, I'm not sure. I'm not sure if I really believe in that. But then it depends what you understand by utopia. When I think of utopia, I probably think primarily of how utopian societies have been presented in the worlds of science fiction. Multi-species, harmonious interaction, abundance of facilities, wealth, and just a generally becalmed, happy, harmonious populace being led by wise and judicious leaders. I mean, yeah, that is extraordinarily utopian. But I don't know. I mean, obviously at the moment I'm really reflecting on masculinity constantly. This series, the study that I'm doing, and I again return to my fundamental position, which is that I'm not, and nor have I ever been, caught up in my own presentation or demonstration of masculinity. I'm, I think, more in I think more in gender neutral terms of, what kind of person are you? How do you conduct yourself in life? How do you treat people around you? How do you, how do you live in this world? And conduct yourself in a way that is not harmful to others, that is not disruptive to others. And how do you set about trying to achieve what you want to achieve in life? How do you set about trying to be the person you want to be in life? How do you do that most successfully? Because I suppose my fundamental belief is that the more we achieve that idea of realization and actualization of, who we are as people, the more we make that meet what we want to do with our lives, the more we bring that cohesive being into our relationships with others, the more we bring that cohesive, aligned being into the world, into the public facing areas of our life, out in our communities, out in our jobs, our workplaces, our work settings, our social settings, the more we are radiating something that is recognizably solid, safe, positive, healthy, and I just believe I believe in the outward ripple. Now I don't know if that's magical thinking. But I think if you step out into the world and go, it's my intention here is not to discriminate. My intention here is not to, traduce other people. My intention is not to alienate other people or keep other people away, by faulty thinking or prejudicial thinking. My intention is to, live my own life, do the best I can, take care of the people closest to me to the best of my ability, and not waste energy with, getting caught up in a way of thinking or a way of behaving that is what? Destructive to others, that is dismissive of others. And that's not the same thing as, wanting to make friends with everyone. That's not the same thing as, rushing out and going, every stranger is a friend I haven't met. I don't believe that. What I do believe is, you don't have to be afraid of interactions. You don't have to be afraid of encounters with others. And, there has to be a discretionary frame dropped around that. Like, that depends on circumstances. That depends on, where you find yourself. It depends on where you are. But, I just believe that there's always a point, there's always a place of common experience. There's always a place of shared humanity. And I just find it offensive and offensively stupid to deny anybody's right to kind of be who they are. And I definitely find it troubling to relegate others and go, no, you're not that. Or again, like the most staggering leap of all for me would be to say, I'm a man and you're not. Now, I mean, when I just examined that statement, I'm like, who can you say that to? I could say it to a cat. I could say it to a sheep, several of which I saw this morning when I was walking up in the mountains with Pepper, the dog. I could say it to Pepper. You're not a man. You're a dog. I'm a man. I could say it to my wife, my daughter. I could say it to a boy, a child. But could I say that to a black man? Could I say that to a gay man? Could I say that to a trans man? You're not a man. I'm a man. I mean, okay, you can go, well, now hold on a second. A trans man was a woman at some point. A drag queen. I'm like, no, that's a man dressed as a woman. I mean, the trans discussion I find, I continue to find really interesting and engrossing, and I have got an interview lined up. It's not probably going to dovetail neatly with this series, but it'll happen in the next month, I hope. I'm really looking forward to that, because I'm going to really get the experience from the horse's mouth, so to speak. Because I've got a friend of mine coming on, and he has serious expertise in this area of transsexuality and trans advocacy, and that's one to keep an eye out for in a few weeks, I hope, at the maybe 4 or 5 weeks from now. So don't worry, I'll give you notice when that's coming up. I think that's going to be a great conversation. But I think my position is fundamentally one of, I want, and again, this comes back to the utopian idea that, let's just get post this. My frame would be much more Marxist, much more about economic inequality, much more. It'd be much more of a socialist frame. Now, I know you can argue that that's perhaps a misdirect, that's perhaps naive, that is not. That's not the focus. It's a cop out when we've got a world that is under increasing pressure in terms of mass migration, economic flight, asylum seeking, migration of refugees. It is a hot topic here in Ireland, but I think what it comes down to for me is it's the most egregious insult and arrogance to deny any person their humanity, and for me to deny somebody their manhood or their identification as male, I'm not comfortable with that. I'm like, no, I'm not going to do that. It's like there's other conversations to be had here, and I'm happy to listen to your experience, because I haven't had it and I don't know it. I'm happy to be educated, but I'm not going to deny you that. And I didn't complete the point I was going to make about class, because I got sidetracked into the utopian idea. But again, there's a class issue. Now you can think of maybe a caste system in India, You can think of feudal systems historically, from, lords down to serfs, masters and servants, masters and owners, masters and slaves. But class, I think, is still very palpable. I've been having versions of this conversation, I feel, for 30 years or more. To me, class is it's sensibility. Class is definitely economic on the surface, but it's also cultural, social. It's learned behaviors. It's shared behaviors. It's learned attitudes, shared attitudes. It's language. It's dress. It's all, it's these external signals. And then, of course, you have, the idea of transcending class, or, moving from one class to the other and attaining new status, or seeking credibility. And, that stuff is it's all fascinating. It's all sort of anthropological. It's human behavior. It's human society. It's human interaction. And it's very connected to ideas of masculinity as well. So, like, what codes or modes of masculinity are more acceptable at different levels of society? One thing that comes to mind, with my interest in film and acting, is how in England there's definitely been an ongoing conversation about class and about representation. And certainly it seemed for a while there that every other actor that was breaking through and doing well in movies was coming from a very well-to-do private school educated background. And it's a touchy subject, and it's a bit of a hot button issue. It's people are sensitive about this because there's an implication of elitism. There's an implication of access to better things. And it's like, hold on, you were already privileged, but now you're a really successful Hollywood actor. What the hell? And it's like, where are the people who are coming from much less privileged positions? Where are the working class actors? And that's also very relevant to masculinity. Who enjoys power? Who has the easier ride to the top? Who's already moving in a nicer circle of life? My conception there is, it's a vertical life and society. It's a vertical pole, and there are circular platforms at different levels all the way up. It's like a little tray of sandwiches. What do you call them? With all the shitty sandwiches on the bottom and the really fancy ones on top. So yet again, another murderous metaphor in here. But it's this idea that there's one version of masculinity that satisfies the broad concept. It's not really true, is it? Because I'm just like, if you present as a man, and you're biologically, you are a man. It's kind of like, well, that's good enough for me. And then it's like, okay, so what now? What kind of person are you? How are you conducting yourself? And how are you fitting in or not to the received the received roles, the received types of masculinity that you've been presented with? Do they chime with you? Are you embracing what's been given? Are you are you, chafing against it? You go, no, that's not for me. That doesn't fit. And again, my own personal point of view is, you're free. You're free to choose. You're free to choose what, how you want to be as a man. And if you think about representation and different codes and a utopian kind of vision, did I talk about this recently? The Eurovision Song Contest and the gender diversity on display there, and the kind of deliriously gender positive, queer positive presentation of what seemed like the majority of acts. I mean, it's like the Eurovision has become like a queer festival, and I don't know what to say. Is that something that challenges you? It doesn't challenge me. It doesn't particularly interest me. I was like, oh, okay, yeah, fine. Like, is the music any good? And then I just start to feel old because I go, no, there's no music there. Maybe I did talk about this a few episodes ago, but like I try to think of this as well, not just from the perspective of my own perspective, a 50-year-old straight white guy in Ireland, but I just think if you're a kid, like if you're a boy watching the Eurovision, and you go, oh, okay, cool. A man can be that. I just think, yeah, brilliant. I think fantastic. Because it's less static, isn't it? It's less resistance. It's a clearer path. It's a clearer option. And then this comes back to then arguments for, representation. Who gets seen? What iterations of masculinity do we see? Why was a film like Moonlight so what word am I looking for here? Why was it so resonant? Why did it punch through with such power? And one of the reasons is we hadn't we hadn't seen representations of gay blackness or black gay identity prior to that, and there was a class thing there as well, because that was the main character was coming from a rough background, doubly disenfranchised economically, racially, and then struggling with queerness, struggling with being gay. I only saw it once. I saw it in the cinema and I absolutely loved it. I thought it was great and powerful and moving and kind of beautiful, with lovely performances by all the actors involved. And yeah, and a lovely exploration of masculinity as well, and kind of I think it lends itself to some of the stuff I was talking about last week, because this idea of my argument last week, that men have rich, consuming, vibrant and vital interior lives, and if that interior life is revolving around identity and who I'm being given permission to be, I think that's so powerful and so crucial that space is made to allow that person to go, this is who I am, this is the type of man I am, and not be punished for it, not be relegated for it, not be discriminated against because of it. I just think we've got to, look, I'm sorry, I mean, I'm veering into preachy territory here, which again, I go, well, that is, again, it's my idealism. It's, maybe it is utopian, but, look, if you want to reduce this down, the first point is, you've no bloody right You've no bloody right to discriminate against somebody else. You've no bloody right to go, this is how you should be. It's absurd to me. It's illogical. You know, it's just the height of arrogance. Now, I'm not talking about, you know, behavior like antisocial behavior or violence or, you know, criminality or, you know, whatever it might be. I'm not talking about that. Like, I'm saying, you know, again, within reason, within the, you know, kind of the bounds of reasonably acceptable social interaction and behavior and cohabitation in society, I'm like, okay, let's just kind of go. The baseline is we're going to agree. We're just more or less trying to pursue the same things. We're trying to achieve a livable life. We're trying to achieve something that is adjacent to happiness, to fulfillment, something that allows for the, you know, the presence of joy in my life. And if that's, you know, if that's a given understanding, then when we see difference and then when we see inequality, it should be a collective concern to go, well, why do they have less? Why does that man have less than I have? What's going on here? Why isn't that person being given the same opportunities? Now, you know, I hear myself speaking. I'm going, okay, hold on a second. Are you mad? Like, this is not the world we live in. Well, what world do you want to live in? I mean, that, you know, that's also the question. What world do you want to live in? The concerns should be moving towards distribution of wealth. The concerns should be moving towards equality of opportunity. The concerns should be moving towards affordable housing, affordable health, affordable education, and, you know, not othering, not you're less than, you're not this, you're not a man. Sorry, that's a bit unwieldy, is it? I'm not sure. I'm not. You know, I've been jumping around a bit, but I don't know. I mean, I did say I was going to try and answer the question: who wants to be a man? Who, you know, who does want to be a man? Boys? Do boys want to be men? I want to be a man someday. I'm going to be a big man. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. Some little girls want to be men because somewhere they're going, I don't identify. This is not my body. This is not the body I feel right in. I've just got no insight into that experience. I don't know. I just don't know what that is, where it begins, where it starts. I'm sure there's a range of experiences, no doubt, because that is what it is to be human. Who wants to be a man? What's so great about being a man? I know some women would say, well, you get listened to for a start. People take your opinion seriously. Yeah, maybe. If my listening stats are anything to go on for this podcast, that's not necessarily true. Oh my goodness. Yeah. I don't know. Listen, it's I just think it's misleading. The idea that we can go, men are this, you know, the idea of the monolithic man. It's just not that simple. There are so many layers, you know, there's so many layers, you know, it's history, it's economy, it's geography, it can be, you know, something that's, you know, genealogical. It can be, it's, you know, it's social, it's cultural, it's inherited. And And contrary to what you might think, it is enormously varied. And I don't know, it's just something that, you know, I think I know it's historical. I know the idea of, you know, the battle of the sexes. I know it's historical. But I think we've accelerated. Certainly in the West, we've accelerated so far away from that binary. And there are so many elements to this that have kind of exploded the idea of the oversimplification of masculinity. And I think the quicker we can, you know, adapt to a much more nuanced understanding or interrogation of masculinity, the better it'll be for all of us. And that applies to all men everywhere. You know, contextualize, bring the nuance, bring the different facets. And remember, you know, a man is many, many different things and can look like many, many different things as well. Okay, that's it. I'm sure I have like 50 million other, you know, points of view on this, but that's all I've got for you today. So I'm not sure if I answered my own questions satisfactorily, but the you know, really what I was trying to look at were, you know, different, you know, iterations of masculinity. As ever, you know, this is not comprehensive. This is just me doing the best I can in the moment and trying to offer points of conversation, points of discussion, points of departure that encourage more thoughtfulness and more consideration. And I hope this episode has contributed to that successfully. Okay, I will be back next week. I'm not sure with what. But if you enjoyed what you heard and want to share comments, throw me some love, you can do so. You can find the Clear Out Podcast on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube. Leave a comment, rate the podcast, review the podcast, share it with someone else, for goodness sake. And if you really feel like this is something that improves your life, improves your week, consider supporting the show financially through the Patreon link, patreon.com/theclearout, and visit the website, theclearout.com. It's shiny, it's new, it's got lots of lovely things there. All of the episodes of the podcast you can find there, as well as the blog, various articles, some short stories, poetry, etc. That's it. I will talk to you real soon. Thank you so much for listening. Stay well, stay safe. Think about men, think about masculinity, or don't. You don't have to. Just, you know, think about what you want to think about. But challenge, question your thinking, please. That's, you know, that's a healthy habit. There's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing to be scared of. Okay, I'll see you next week. Take it easy. Thanks for listening. Mind yourselves. Bye.